Lower taxes. Trump won an election. One of the reasons he won an election amongst many, but we're going to focus on the economy today, was he campaigned on lowering taxes. So lowering taxes, is this good or is this bad for markets? And you mentioned, we were discussing a little bit earlier, that lower taxes will most likely result in, they're not going to make up the difference with regards to, it's how do I say this? It's most likely going to increase the debt, just because of the fact that, yes, when you lower taxes, technically there's more productivity, but I don't think that there's still going to be a shortfall. So is the debt going to increase? I would probably say yes. But one could also argue, I think we're in a position where the debt's not going to get paid off anyways. They're at $36 trillion in debt. The entire West, the entire world has all this debt, including China. That's a whole other topic we can get into. But you can't win a campaign. You can't campaign to cut costs, or to cut spending, excuse me. And cut costs technically. So I like the lower taxes. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it's just the reality is the debt's not going to go anywhere, and the debt's most likely going to increase. I would even argue that the debt, you know how each president kind of like has more debt than all the other predecessors like combined? I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened with Trump again this term. I think it's more of just the debt cycle the world is in. China has debt, the West has debt, USA has debt, Canada has debt, Europe has debt. Everyone has debt. Japan has debt. So
yeah,
so I guess my question is, the point you're making is, yes, so they lower taxes. Is that going to increase the debt? Most likely, but so what? That's my point.
I mean, Trump wants to, basically continue with the tax cuts he made in his prior administration, which are coming up for renewal or expiry, I believe, at the end of December 2025. Mm-hmm. And yes, lowering taxes lowers revenues to the government. So in theory, you have less money to pay down debt, which is a negative. But then the pushback will be lower taxes stimulate economic activity and growth, which results in increased tax revenues down the road. So it's a balance that nobody can really identify concretely, right? Like, this is how it's going to work, and these are the numbers. You really don't know how it's going to play itself out. From a business perspective, from the business community, I mean, who doesn't like tax cuts? I mean, it's good for business. It's good for long-term planning. It's good for capital spending in the U.S. because you want to be in a jurisdiction where you're getting the best bang for your buck. If you are a business, you locate to the States, and we've seen a trend the trend is unprecedented with money flowing into the States historically right now.
Yeah.
So those are factors to consider. I mean, if it plays out that debt is becoming too much of a concern, the bond vigilantes will take care of that. In other words, the bond market will remind the government that, hey, debt's getting too big. You'll see it in the bond market because the bond market is the ultimate arbiter, right, of debt.
Is the bond market doing that right now?
It's pretty much given a pass. I mean, it's liked some of the the headlines that are coming out of the new administration, the policies. Even this morning, employment numbers were out, and the bond market took it well. Even though employment was kind of ticking up, depending which metric you use.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they can't do whatever they want. Like, Trump can't do whatever he wants with taxes. There's going to be a lot of pushback from Congress, from interests. So in theory, it's great for business. It's probably going to happen eventually. It probably won't be his first priority, right? Because he has until the end of 2025 to get this settled. So he'll so right now in Washington on Capitol Hill, there's either a two-step or we attack it all at once. So the two-step would kick that one down the road. But I mean, taxes are definitely, lower taxes is definitely stimulative for the economy, and business will welcome it. I think that's part of the reason why the markets have rallied.
Interesting. And then so one of the things that we want to touch on too, so with regards to policy changes that are on the horizon with Trump, is the border security issue. So number one, do you think that actually is this more just a political topic, or does this actually have any impact on markets? I'm not a market guy. I mean, I follow the markets. I don't work in the markets like you do. But does this have any impact on the markets, the fact that they're going to have a stronger border, or not really?
I think the view is that if you are aggressive in trying to remove undocumented immigrants from the economic system, let's call it, in the U.S., there's going to be fewer workers that are willing to work in things like restaurants and construction. A high percentage of the people that are the boots on the ground, as far as framing, working with concrete, moving materials around a job site, the people that are willing to work in 100-degree heat in Florida building a house. If you lose a lot of those people, it's going to be more difficult to build a house, quite frankly. You're losing your base of employees. Like, workers will be less. That's one threat that I think the markets see, because that will also be inflationary, right? And some of these undocumented immigrants actually work and pay taxes in the U.S. They're just not really officially allowed to stay in the U.S. So I think the whole thing is...
I didn't know that. Yeah. I thought if you're like undocumented, I thought if you're there legally, that like you basically worked under the table and didn't pay into the system.
Yeah, well, that for sure, that occurs as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's who he's targeting, right? From an election perspective, let's face it, a lot of what he wants to do is distasteful when it comes to human rights. But the reality is you have to protect your border. You can't just have an open border.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is it more bark than bite? That's what I would suspect. Some southern states would push back, like Texas would push back, I'm sure, on economic impacts. At the same time, they want to close the border as well.
So they would push back on the fact that if they are super strict on deportations, that would drive wages up, which would be inflationary. That's the logic?
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. And just for an example, take the construction industry. If you throw on top of that more tariffs on steel, copper, lumber from Canada, the price of homes are going to go up even more, which is more strain on the American consumer, which again goes against what Trump has said he was going to do, is make the cost of living more affordable for the average American. So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, in my opinion. It might sit well with some people that we're going to clean bad immigrants out of the country. The reality is you need them. So there's a balance between that, right? Maybe a system that vets people more.
The way it used to be.
Yeah, the country's built on immigration. I mean, North America is built on immigration.
This is where I'm gonna defend Trump. That's something where he's not saying we don't want to have immigration. He's just saying if you want to come to our country, you do so through the port of entry.
Yeah,
you come in legally. And Tom Homan, the bulldog border czar, that's I would not want to cross him. He said the same thing. If you want to come in, you do it through the port of entry.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Countries need to have borders. And, there's news going on in Canada where we have not to the same, or at least I don't think, not to the same extent where we have illegal immigration in Canada, but, they've found people that came into our country illegally that are members of ISIS. There's if you just have a complete open door policy and anyone and everyone can come in, are the vast majority of them are going to be good people? I would think so. But there's going to be, even if 1% of 10 million people, and that's a conservative number for how many illegal immigrants have come in recently into the United States, even if 1% of that are bad actors, that's still a lot of people that can cause a lot of damage. And this is the debate I always have with my friends, or my friends who are lefties. So they go, show me a study that says illegal immigration, that migrant crime is higher than regular crime. And it's not so much that. And again, there isn't really accurate data on that. It's more the fact that, my buddy, he literally writes in the text, show me a study where illegal immigrants commit more crime. And I go, dude, you put in the text illegal. They're just, we have to have rules. And my point is just like what I said a minute ago. If 1%, if 0.5%, if 0.1% of 10 million people are bad actors, that is an issue. You have to have rules. You have to have just common sense immigration policy. And if you want to come to our country or our countries in the West, you want to come to Canada, you want to come to the United States, there are rules, there are procedures you need to go through. We should be vetting them. I agree 100%. And this is not controversial. It shouldn't be controversial. And yes, it's nice to help people out in other countries and refugees, but we got to take care of our own first. We got a cost of living crisis here in Canada. Not to the same extent in the United States, but again, this goes back to populism. People go, I'm Canadian, I'm American, America first. And I don't see anything wrong with that. That's
would-
my opinion.
I would say Canada first, so there's no problem from my point of view either.
Yeah.
We always look out for our own interests first.
Yeah, like when did it become a bad thing to say, no, I want to prioritize Canadians first. We got to take care of our own before we start helping out other people. I don't see that as controversial.
No, sure. And it doesn't mean that we can't have collaboration or be very good friends with other nations.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
course.
obviously very important as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I again, you know, it was a popular campaign argument, right? A lot of it was probably exaggerated or not true, you know.
Probably.
You know, gangs and drug dealers and stuff. I mean, there's domestic gangs and drug dealers as well.
Course,
and
yeah.
you're absolutely right. How do you measure it accurately? We can't.
No.
So, again, you know, to use that as a campaign pitch to get elected and as he says, you know, clean up the country as far as illegal immigrants goes, it might sound distasteful in a way. But bottom line, you're right. You have to protect the borders, but you cannot implement drastic change, especially if it's perceived by the rest of the world as being, you know, overly aggressive. Like you know, if you envision down the road scenes of federal agents dressed like military personnel breaking into a factory in Texas and dragging people screaming, you know, away from that, that's going to hit the media, and it's going to leave a bad impression of the U.S. I think that's something else that if you look forward, right, could be used on both sides of the equation.
It's going to hit the media, but then again, immigration is one of the issues. This is why there's a rise in right-wing political parties across the West, because they feel, and I'm not saying this is my opinion, they feel as if they are losing the personality of their country. They feel as if they're losing the values of their country. This is happening in the UK. This is happening in Sweden. This is happening in France. This is happening all across Europe. This is happening in the US. This is happening in Canada. And so a lot of people agree with what we're saying. And I think most people who don't agree with what we're saying probably live in a gated community.
Yeah, well, listen, I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, diversity is fantastic, you know.
Yeah.
If you love food,
Yeah.
I mean, Montreal, I mean, we've got every ethnic group with restaurants with fantastic food.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, you know, all immigrants and ethnicities bring amazing stuff to our culture, our open culture in Canada and the U.S. for sure. But, you know, at the same time, one thing that sticks in my mind and absolutely makes my blood boil is when you know, see protests in the streets where people would be chanting "Death to America" or burning the American flag. Makes my blood pressure shoot up. Like, there's no place for that.
I
like
agree.
Common values, yes. Basic values, yes. Freedom, democracy, freedom of speech, right to protest. But when you're doing stuff that is disruptive and hateful, there's no place for that in our country. And unfortunately, this is here. How do you get rid of it? I mean, I have my opinions on that. I won't express them publicly, but I mean, that's just unacceptable in our society to do stuff like that.
If you want to come to our country, you want to come to the West, I mean, you're here for a reason.
Yeah.
Just stay in the country. If you don't like it here, I mean, just stay at the country where you came from. So you're here for a reason. Adapt our values. And this is the same thing. And, you know, my father brought up a good point too, because we're having a conversation about this. And it's always somewhere in the middle. I mean, it was the same thing when the Italians came here generations ago. Same thing with the Irish. Same thing with the Polish. Same thing with the Ukrainians. Same thing. It's always the immigrants.
You forgot the Scottish, our common heritage.
Yeah, the Scots. But, you know, they come here, then the Irish set up mobs, and they're all gangsters. The Italians set up mobs too, and it's not all Italians, and I love Italians, but they're, you know what I mean? So there's always, when immigrants come in, the people that live in the country, there's always going to be a little bit of friction. This is normal. But we just need to have some type of a balance. And again, I just want to kind of say this, and I know you agree with this. We are a nation built on immigration, and we need to have immigrants. But there needs to be procedures to follow in order for these immigrants to come to our country. I love Canada. I also love the United States. It's a great place to live. Come, adapt our values. There's nothing wrong with saying we need a vetting process.
Yeah. Immigration, values, rule of law, democracy.
Yes. I like that.
If you don't agree with that,
yeah,
then perhaps you should reconsider wanting to live here,
yeah,
because that's the way we want it here. It's the way we like it, in my view. And that's all it requires is just a belief in the same core values that we have.
What do we stand for as a country?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That makes us different from other parts of the world where you've got, autocracy, or outright dictatorship.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's. I wanted to touch on this point as well. So emission standards. So another thing that Trump campaigned on, emission standards, subsidies for electric vehicles. That's kind of tied into this deregulation in the energy sector, deregulation as a whole. But one thing for sure, I guess if we can wrap this up into a nice little bow, Trump, from what I understood from his rhetoric, was, hey, we want to drill, baby, drill. We need to be energy independent, not only to drop the price of energy, which is going to benefit the consumer, benefit the people of America. We also need to drop energy if we are to compete on a global scale, especially with the AI race. AI is going to require these server farms. For people that don't know, these server farms require massive amounts of energy to run. AI is, it's like, I was listening to this the other day too. I didn't know this. Every single time, if you want to go on Google, and AI, by the way, is requires a lot more energy to run than just Google. But even going on Google to run like a Google search, I think it was like 0.2 cents. So every single time you type something in and Google goes to get the answer for you, there's energy that's being used in the background. So back to Trump. What's his, you know more about this than I do, and you're very well versed in the energy space. So what's his plan for America with regards to energy and deregulation?
He wants independence, self-sufficiency, and reliability. If before what I can recall, or barely recall as a child, was when because of Mideast oil embargoes, I seem to remember my parents lining up at a gas station trying to fill the car because we sort of abandoned, or we didn't have the capacity using old technology to have enough oil. So we relied on external oil to come into North America. Mm-hmm. With technology, fracking, horizontal drilling, efficiencies, all of this sort of stuff. America now is a net exporter of oil and gas.
Were they a net exporter before Trump's presidency in 2016?
Likely back then, yes. I think it's been a phenomenon that's been going on, let's say, for the last decade. But in the 70s, it was a threat, right? You had to put caps on gasoline consumption. It was really a strain on the economy to not be able to fill your car. So we learned lessons from back then, and I agree that energy independence is important. You don't want to be held hostage by another nation that's supplying you with oil. Look at Germany
and Russia.
Right? Exactly. That's a great example.
Yeah.
It's a great example. We have plenty of it in North America.
And when for the viewers, what Germany? What happened to Germany?
Well, they were reliant on
what's happening to Germany right now.
Well, they were reliant on Russian natural gas for electricity generation. They
shut down the nuclear plants.
They shut down their nuclear plants, while now the rest of the world is thinking about opening up new projects for nuclear, particularly with small modular reactor technology. Now it's a lot easier to build one than it was years ago when it would take a decade to get approved and built. So there was some policy errors, and of course with the invasion of Ukraine and Russian energy basically being sanctioned, Europe was caught again reliant on solar and wind as well. And if said this before, if the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you need a reliant source of energy, which generally is natural gas or coal generated, or nuclear generated. So that's what Trump wants to see, and that's where Canada is positioned in a very good spot. Sheer logistics, we're their next door neighbor. We have tons to export to the U.S., which we do. The pipeline system is designed so that we are, we're providing natural gas to essentially parts of the Midwest and the entire west coast of the U.S. And the gasoline that goes into Americans' gas tanks comes from heavy oil. The refineries in the U.S., the Midwest, and particularly in the Gulf Coast, are designed to refine Canadian heavy grade of oil. There's really, this is just a quick lesson on let's say, oil dynamics. There's really three sources of heavy crude on this side of the world, and it's Canada. It's like the Alberta tar sands, synthetic heavy crude. You've got Venezuelan, which of course has been sanctioned in the past, and you've got Mayan heavy, which comes out of Mexico. But Mexico has their own refinery build-out going on, so they're going to retain most of their production for domestic use for their own refineries. So where else are these refineries that you just don't, rebuild those overnight, going to get their feedstock to refine gasoline for American drivers? It's from Canada. It's from Canada. There's nowhere else to get it from. So that's why I kind of look at Trump's threats on tariffs. I'm not the only person that thinks this way. It's almost impossible that he puts tariffs on Canadian oil and gas.
Yeah, it's not going to
because that's a tax on Americans, and that's higher inflation.
Yeah.
It hurts the economy. It goes against everything that he's been pushing for. So I think, I'll call his bet and I'll raise him 4 million barrels of oil on his threat to tax Canadian energy. I think I'm right, but
I would agree.
he can be a little bit erratic. He may push that, but to me, there's no chance that that's realistically what's going to occur.
So if you had to wrap it up into a nice little bow, what would you say the markets liked most about the Trump presidency, the fact that he won the presidency? Just from a global perspective, a vague perspective.
One or three?
Whatever you want. You could say one or three.
Deregulation
is
one.
Yeah.
Realistic policies with regards to things like carbon emissions, certain policies that are expensive and not proven to work, that would go along the lines of ESG, for example, and just, pragmatic management of the economy. Like let's get real. We just cannot keep taxing and letting debt levels rise, because eventually you have to pay the piper. So I like the fact that, those are all pro-business policies, which really, I forget who said it once, but it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what people care about, because when you can't maintain your standard of living, that's, I think, a tough pill to swallow for any nation or for any populace. And we're seeing that in Canada.
And I've always said this, I've been saying the same thing too. So it's like our current government, they keep hammering this climate crisis hoax down our throat. Yeah, I called it a hoax. It's some people say, is the temperature changing? Yes, the temperature changing. And I work in insurance. Are there more catastrophic losses? Are there more hurricanes? Yes, there are. Do we have an impact on it? Probably. But try explaining that to somebody who is living paycheck to paycheck and can't feed their family. They don't care. They want to be able to live day to day. If you can't get by your day-to-day life, you're not going to care about what's happening to the climate. It's like the logic of, if we want to basically help the climate, I forget the environmentalists whose theory this is. If you want to go to India and someone's living on $1 a day and they can't feed their family, you're not going to convince that person that they should care about the environment and care about being clean. What they're going to care about is feeding their family. So in order for people to actually care about the environment more, and I'm not saying that we don't need clean energy, and we've done a good job, but if you want them to care about the environment more, raise their standard of living, because then they can start to focus on other things besides living day to day. They can get by day to day easily. Now they can start focusing on, hey, maybe we should be buying nuclear energy. Maybe I should be trying to use more solar. Maybe I should be trying to use more wind. And places like, to the point you just said a little bit earlier, a place like the UK, this was on the podcast, listen to the Looney Hour on a regular basis, the guy Rich, so he said there are some days where the entire grid of the UK is powered by solar and wind. There are days, but there are also days when it's not windy and it's not sunny, the grid is not powered by that. And where do they have to go get the energy? Coal, or they have to go get it from gas, or they have to get it from wherever. So it'd be great if we could use 100% of the time use wind and solar, but it's just not realistic at this point in time. And we need to have pragmatic policies. And I think that's what Trump brought. You might not like the way he talks. You might not, he is rough around the edges. He can definitely be a bit of a jerk sometimes, but people elected him this time for his policies, not for who he is as an individual. That's what some people like him as an individual too, but I think that's why he won.